What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today I wanted to have a discussion about an important topic when it comes to Modern Warfare 4, and I am a little bit later than many on this one. I know a lot of people have already talked about this in great detail, but I just had other videos that I felt were a little more important, so I have been pushing this one back. But I wanted to finally dive into the fact that something they've confirmed is, at least in the game's current state, there will be no factions or faction-specific operators, and instead, you can pick whatever operator and whatever skin you want to be used every single game, regardless of the side of the map that you're spawning on or the team that you're spawning with. And that means you can have teammates and enemies that look literally identical using the same operator and the same skin. And to be clear, this isn't the first time we've seen something like this happen in Call of Duty. Just off the top of my head, I believe this happened in Infinite Warfare, Black Ops 3, Black Ops 4 as well, and Call of Duty Vanguard. But there is a key difference with at least a few of those games, and that is they would put red lights directly on enemy character models, and I believe it was blue or green lights on friendly character models. So at a glance, it was always really easy to tell which characters were on the enemy team and which ones were on the friendly team without any sort of like heads-up display indicator. It was directly on the character model. Although in Vanguard, we didn't have that, and that was one of my complaints with the game throughout the year, and one of the things that I felt took away from Vanguard. And so when I heard the news that there was no factions in this game, I was definitely disappointed to hear that. And before we dive deeper into my opinions on this, I did want to point out that they're at least looking at feedback. There was quite a bit of backlash to this when they first announced that that would be the case. And one of the co-studio heads, Mark Grigsby, responded to this on Twitter and said, "We are aware of the potential advantages and disadvantages," referring to no factions, "and we don't want to restrict you from playing with what you choose because the level dictated that you need to use the other faction. I hear the feedback though, as it is a topic we discuss." So to me, this implies that they're aware of the feedback, but they're probably going to be sticking to their guns. However, it is still a topic of discussion, so I'd say there's at least a chance something could change here. But I'm not going to be holding my breath on that, partially based on that reply, and also based on the fact that their entire create a class system is built around the fact that you have an operator tied to each of your classes. And so changing this so you now introduce factions and lock which character you can use depending on which faction you spawn on that particular map, that would likely require a fair amount of reworking things in the menus to get that to work. Now, it's not impossible, and you could just make it so you select one operator from each faction, for instance, per class, and then depending on which side of the map you spawn on, you'll get one operator or the other. I'm just saying that that wouldn't necessarily be a quick and easy fix where they just flip a switch and everything's all fixed. They would have to actually rework how they're handling that system a bit. Either way, let's talk about my thoughts on this, and particularly why I'm not a fan of no factions existing in the game. And I do want to be clear that this isn't a deal breaker, but it is something that I would consider a mark against the game. And it's an avoidable mark against the game, and I just want the game to be the best it can be. So I would much rather they stick to having unique factions that are tied to the side of the map that you spawn on a particular map. And to me, this is a two-pronged issue. The first issue is with the gameplay itself and the readability of the gameplay. Obviously, this can create some frustration and confusion when you have teammates that look literally identical to the enemies. Again, using the same operator and the same skin, if you come around the corner in one situation and see that your teammate is Ghost, and then later in the match you come around a corner and you see that exact same Ghost skin, then it would be very reasonable that you maybe hesitate for a second because that guy's on your team, right? And this would be especially bad in hardcore game modes because you have fewer HUD elements to work with. But even in core, where you always have a minimap, for instance, while this may not be the type of thing that you notice and that's causing frustration like every single gunfight you get into, it's still something that will be popping up from time to time, and it creates those unnecessarily frustrating situations that logically shouldn't even exist within the game. It makes no sense that the exact same person can be your teammate and your enemy at the same time. Now, as I said, some of the previous games that have had no factions, they effectively solved this issue by putting red lights directly on the character model. So regardless of the mode or whether or not you had a minimap active, it was always really easy to immediately tell if that player was friendly or not. And I highly doubt they're going to be doing that in this game. I wouldn't want them to do that. I feel like that would ruin some of the visual identity of the game and the groundedness of the game with its setting. So instead, we're likely just going to have to rely on the red or blue dots that appear above their head, that are heads-up display elements that are not baked onto the character models themselves. And while again, in most situations, that's probably good enough and fine, At the same time, I'm sure we all know how inconsistent those dots can be, and how often you'll have a teammate's dot just happen to line up perfectly above the head of an enemy player, causing that hesitation, and that will especially be true if you can't identify who's friend or foe based on their character model. And along with that, something that actually takes place in game, at least for many players, is they do recognize early on in a match which character models the enemies are using, and will often even attribute that to their playstyle and what they're going to be doing, and we use that information to decide how we want to approach that situation. So that character model identification does impact gameplay, at least for a lot of people. Not everybody plays the game with that sort of depth. For some people, it's all surface level, but I did want to point out that that is something that does come into play for many players out there. And so that's the first, and I'd say the most obvious issue, is just gameplay readability. This will suffer if your teammates can look identical to your enemies. Whereas the other big issue that comes with this comes down to visual immersion and groundedness and the world building from campaign making its way into multiplayer. And for some, they don't care about this at all, and that's fine. But even for me, as somebody that doesn't particularly care that much about the campaign itself, I still like having a certain feeling of immersion into the world that they've built by being on the SAS side, for instance. So me and my teammates are the quote-unquote good guys, whereas the other team, that's Spetsnaz. And so all of the character models are going to be the quote-unquote bad guys, according to the world building and the story. And I find this was especially egregious in Vanguard, since it was a alternate reality, but still World War II-ish setting. And in multiplayer, it was literally labeled as my team versus enemy team. So there was no allies versus Axis or anything like that. It was literally my team versus enemy team, which was just so ridiculous in that game. Thankfully, at the very least in this game, it looks like they will have different factions as far as which team you're spawning on. We've seen scoreboards show up with the little bits of gameplay footage that we've seen, and we can very clearly see that they do have SAS versus Spetsnaz, for instance. The problem, though, is I can use any one of the SAS characters while playing on Spetsnaz, which just doesn't make sense within that world that they've built. And again, when it comes to that gameplay readability, when I spawn in on the SAS side, something just feels really off about the idea of me killing Price on the other team while I'm playing as SAS. That's the type of thing that, while maybe subtle, it does kill a lot of that world building and immersion within the context of multiplayer there. Although I do want to go on a bit of a tangent here, but it is related to a degree. One thing I'm still hoping for with us being able to spawn in as SAS or Spetsnaz, regardless of the operators we choose, I am really hoping we at least have unique announcer dialogue depending on which side we're on. So if I do spawn SAS, then the announcer that I hear in-game that's calling out various actions, they're going to have a British accent. Whereas if I'm on Spetsnaz, they'll have a Russian accent, for instance. That's at least something that can help tie together that world building to a degree. And it might seem like such a subtle thing, but this is something we used to have back in the day. And when I do go back and play the older Call of Duties, that subtle difference can really go a long way into the feeling while playing the game and the overall experience that I'm getting with the game. And that goes to show that subtle elements like that can make a really big difference. And while I don't think it's been revealed which way they're going on that at this point, perhaps one of the content creators that have played it have mentioned one way or the other. Either way, basically everything I'm talking about here with no factions has a potential to create a bunch of these little issues with the game, and the biggest problem I have is all of these issues are entirely avoidable. This is a conscious decision that they are making for the game, and their reasoning behind it is they want everybody to use whatever operator they want, regardless of which side of the map they spawn on. And to me, that small upside is absolutely not worth the list of downsides that come with this decision. Why throw all of these elements away and throw a lot of the world building, the immersion away from the game, while creating actual logical inconsistencies with the gameplay, just so that people can use one skin that they choose rather than one of two skins that they choose? Does that actually increase their bundle sales to a noticeable degree? Like, are there people that would otherwise be buying a bundle, but they decide against it because they only get to play with that operator maybe half the time rather than literally every single game? On the flip side of that, though, do they not sell more skins if you end up in a situation where you have to choose a skin from each faction and you'll spawn with one or the other, depending on the side of the map you spawn on? Wouldn't that mean that for a lot of people that buy bundles, they'll want to make sure they have a bundle with a skin they really like on one faction, and then another bundle with another skin that they really like on the other faction? In that case, it seems like it would increase bundle sales for a lot of players out there. I obviously don't have the back-end data on that, but I feel like that would at least somewhat cancel each other out. But even with that in mind, sacrificing that visual immersion and that readability with gameplay But even with that in mind, if I'm totally off on that and bundle sales actually increase by a noticeable margin by having the single operator system, is that really worth it for sacrificing the visual immersion and the readability of the gameplay in your game, especially with Infinity Ward? I've been pretty harsh on a lot of the gameplay design decisions modern Infinity Ward has made in their recent titles, but one thing I've always given them a ton of credit for, and a thing that I look forward to in their games, is just how amazing their art, their animations, their sound design, their immersion is in their games. And so by making this decision to not have factions, they're throwing a piece of what makes their games so great away in the name of maybe some more bundle sales. And that's not to mention another big thing to point out here, and that is we're playing a first-person shooter. And that means the vast majority of character models that you are exposed to in the game that you can actually see are going to be other people's character models, not your character model. You can see your character's hands and wrists, and then of course there's going to be situations like the finishing moves or the death animation or the aftermatch winner circle, if that's even going to be a thing in this game. Those are some of the only times you really see your character model while playing the game. And so for me, I'm generally much more concerned about what I'm seeing take place in the world around me than I am with my hands or my wrists, and whether or not those hands and wrists belong to SAS or Spetsnaz, for instance. So overall, when it comes to this, as I said, this isn't a deal breaker for me. I'm much more concerned about the gameplay design with the game, but for some people, this is actually a deal breaker. I've seen plenty of comments from people that said they were looking forward to this game, things were looking really good, but the moment they heard there'd be no factions, they lost all interest and they're not getting the game now. And it is just frustrating to see all of these very obvious issues that are introduced by making this decision when they could have easily been avoided in the first place. So I've still got at least a little bit of hope that our feedback will be heard on this and some adjustments will be made. Like I said, I think the ideal system here is you select 2 operators per class, 1 from each faction, and then the one that you spawn with will be determined based on the side of the map that you're spawning on. If they do that, all of my concerns here are immediately alleviated. Problem solved. It's not an issue anymore. Although I am still hoping we'll also have those faction-specific announcers. But of course, these are just my thoughts on this topic, and I'm very curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How are you feeling about the current route that they are going in when it comes to not having factions in Modern Warfare 4? Is this something that is a big deal to you? Is it something you're kind of indifferent about? Or maybe is this something you actually really enjoy and you're happy that you'll be able to select your operator and use that same operator every single match? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.